Hello ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX14 Walsh and welcome to some more Gran Turismo Sport, a racing game developed by Polyphony Digital and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment for the PlayStation 4. Focusing on the game's online mode, known as Sport Mode, in this episode I take a look at my performance in the 5th race of the 2019 Manufacturer Series pre-season, which was held at the Tokyo Expressway East Outer Loop Circuit. This was a race in the Group 3 category, with my vehicle being the BMW Motorsport M3 GT. With that, let's get racing. So, taking a look at the grid, you'll see that I've qualified second. A summary of qualifying. At first I was a bit annoyed because my final qualifying run, I thought that I had the pace to put myself in first place, with my lap being a second up on my qualifying lap, i.e. that I qualified with to get second at the midpoint of the circuit. But in the final couple of corners, particularly turns 8 and 9, I got caught behind a slower runner who had nowhere to go, or it being a street circuit, they couldn't just pull off the track and get out of my way, and I had to back out of it. But in retrospect, as we're going down the grid, I quickly realised, no, second place is a great position to be in because it means you don't have to worry about slipstream potential from the guys behind, because I get the advantage of being able to use the tow or the slipstream of the guy in first place, whereas the guy in first place has it all to worry about because everybody behind is going to theoretically have a higher top speed going down to turn 1 compared to them. And that Audi, I assure you, has got a lower top speed compared to some of the cars on this grid. Much like myself, my BMW M3 doesn't have as high a top speed as the Ford Mustang or the BMW M6 is competing in this race. But with that, my strategy for this race, a 9-lap race, do it over 2 stints, had to use the race in medium tight, everybody was forced to use that for this race, a longer first stint of 5 laps, then come in for fuel and finish off with a shorter stint of 4 laps. A little bit of fuel saving would be needed to get me to the end of that 5th lap, as in my trial runs I could only get to 4.5 laps by running the car at maximum fuel power at any point in time. And I'll talk about my fuel saving strategy as we go through the race, as we come down to the final couple of cars in this lobby. 20 car lobby, all drivers bar one were D rated, the other driver was a C rated driver, so in effect this was a race to try and get into the C classification if I could, and that was my target, win the race and become a C driver rating player. Car number 19, an M6 GT3, and then wrapping up with another M3 GT in place number 20 as we're about to get underway. A rolling start. And you can see at the bottom centre of your screen I've got the fuel map settings up. I'm going to be playing around with those as I previously mentioned, and if I can get close enough to the guy in front, i.e. the Audi in first place, I will instantly be turning down the fuel setting towards 2 and 3 in order to save just that little bit of extra fuel, because you never know how important it could be in the long term. So as we weave side to side to warm up the tyres, we are going. 3, 2, 1 and we're off. So straight away I'm going to hook myself into the slipstream of the Audi in front, and as I get closer and closer you'll see I'll drop that fuel map setting from 1 to 2 and then finally to 3 before making the overtake on the left hand side. That'd be the target, because I felt as though taking the outer line going into turn 1 was more beneficial and you could brake later on the brakes. And so we go past now. I've set my fuel map setting now to 2 and then up to 1, so that way I've got full power because I'm no longer benefiting from the slipstream, and it's working out really well. And looking at our rear view mirror, it looks as though 3rd, 4th, 5th and potentially 6th are all coming up charging behind the Audi. Braking at the 100 board, and unfortunately it looks as though the Volkswagen behind's come crashing into the back of myself, and it looks as though the Ford Mustang's come crashing into the back of the Audi in 2nd place. But we've made it through relatively unscathed, our positions haven't changed, and now we are racing, going away from turn 2 into turn 3 and starting the high speed technical section of the circuit. By technical I mean more of the corners rather than just a straight. Now, having got the advantage over the Audi, I got into first. What I thought to myself is, if I can keep them at bay just a little bit longer going into the high-speed chicane at turns 4 and 5, a left-hander into a right-hander, I love this little section, let's just go through it, then I'd be able to control the pace of the rest of the circuit going through turns 6 through to 10, 10 being the final corner, a very sharp, low-speed right-hander, and then we go on to the main straight. And that was something that I learned from watching Formula 1 races, watching the Monaco Grand Prix in particular, whereby if you've got the lead on a tight street circuit, albeit the road's a little bit wider here compared to Monaco, then what that means is you effectively have the track position to control the race pace. As long as you're not miles off of the race pace, you're relatively quick but not as quick as the guy behind. You can still be incredibly frustrating because there's only a limited number of racing lines going through a good number of these corners, and they've got to be incredibly daring to overtake you, or they have to get you on the one straight available to you. But of course the straight here is an incredibly long one, and that's where a lot of the overtaking will be done. So coming through turn 10, we can see that BMW M6 goes very late on the brakes and comes out wide, coming out of the final corner. Looks as though they've got into second place, and now we're charging down the straight to complete lap number 1. Now some of you may be wondering at this point, what's it like racing on a street circuit compared to a standard racing circuit, a dedicated track? Well, that's something I had to learn as I went through this race, because going to the streets, having come from a number of dedicated racetracks, I thought at first it would be very similar. But oh how I was wrong, in the fact that racing around the street circuit for me really did my eyes in, because everything happens so much quicker. On a dedicated racing circuit you have a lot of boards and markers to tell you when you need to brake or when a corner is coming up effectively, whereas here you do have a number of boards, as you'll see up on the left hand side going down into turn 1, and we have the 200 to 50 boards, braking once again at the 100 board. Or just before it in that instance, taking a little bit lighter here. But there'll be some corners as well, such as turn 2 here, which don't have a dedicated board, and I have to use a lamppost, which I've just driven past, in order to act as a signal for me to lift off and start turning the corner. And that meant that concentration really was at a premium here if I wanted to race cleanly through the circuit. Because if you go into one of the walls too hard, that's already a 1 to 1.5 second penalty that will be coming up. And because the penalty zone is on the start point of that final straight, effectively that's about a 3-second penalty in my mind, and that's something I do not want to pick up. So now let's come on to fuel saving. You'll see that I've dropped down to fuel mixture 2 after coming through the initial straight. My idea was go to maximum power on the straight, simply because in doing so I'll get the most out of the car, particularly when I'm running the lead by myself. There is nobody I can sap energy from. I can't take any speed off of anyone because I'm so far ahead of everybody else arguably. My nose isn't behind another car. So instead what I thought to myself was, right, well we're going to have to use maximum fuel on the straight and then drop it down to 2 for all the technical sections, so turns 2 through to 10, and then go back onto power setting 1 on the fuel map for that straight, and that would be the best way to save fuel. Could I have gone down to setting number 3, potentially going through all the corners and that? Yes, but I felt as though that was costing me too much time based on my relative level of experience. And by this management setup, in terms of always going down to 2 when going through the corners, it just about got me to the end of lap number 5 and into the pits. Now taking a look at the timings on the left hand side of the screen, we can see we've got 4 seconds over the M6 in second place currently, another BMW. And that's ideally where we want things to be, but what you'll see is as we come down this straight, starting lap number 3, that time is going to gradually start to stop increasing in my favour, and it will start locking up if they get a clean run onto the straight. And particularly if they're racing alongside third place, where the two can slipstream past one another back and forth, and they can start to really gain time on me. Much like in NASCAR, where you'll see that a lot of slipstream battles go on where people aren't really fighting in order to preserve their position, but instead they're using the slipstream of the guy who passes them to get back past, and that means they're able to pull themselves up to the guy who's further ahead of the field. And that's something that was constantly on my mind. How is everybody going to be gaining over me? And at the same time, what I thought to myself at that point is, why push yourself so hard into making a mistake when you can just simply let that slipstream work in your favour? So what you'll see I'm starting to do as we go through the laps, in order to just save that little bit of extra fuel, particularly through turns 4 and 5, the high speed chicane, which I love here, I'm actually going to be lifting more than I normally would. The idea being I want the guys behind to start to catch up to me, because that puts more mental pressure on them. Because if they can see I'm getting closer and closer, or they're getting closer and closer to me from their perspective, then they're most likely going to start pushing harder. And when they start to push harder, they'll start to consume more fuel. And as they get closer and closer, what that means is I'm in a position whereby, because I'm controlling how much fuel I have in the car, I can really start to choose how much I want to put into the car going into the second stint. And then when we get into that position on the straight where we're fighting one another, I've got more power available to me as I slightly graze the wall there coming out of turn number 8 going for into 9. Haven't lost too much time, but that will be felt in the long term here. And then I could just use slipstream tactics to my favour, much like I did on first place in the opening lap. So I wasn't in the rush to try and get away. I accepted the fact that somebody is going to catch me as this race goes on, because I don't have that clear pace advantage in my driving ability compared to everybody else in this lobby. So we can see that the gap between myself and second place, that BMW M6, is now down to around 3 seconds. It's already dropped over a second and a half almost in the space of a single lap. But we're not going to push the car too hard. We can see on our laps remaining, we've got 2.3 remaining, so we're actually a little bit up on where my fuel saving strategy was when I did my practice simulation runs, where I found I was just about able to get into the pits at the end of lap 5 with 1% fuel remaining. But instead here it's actually going to be high, and I'm expecting it to be about 3-4% rather than 1-2%, which means just a tiny bit of time will be saved in the pits. So in lap number 4 at this point, how about the tyre wear? What was it like? Tyre wear wasn't a problem in this track, and I actually found that you could push these tyres at maximum all the way around for a whole 5 laps and you wouldn't really feel any significant effects. Perhaps on the 5th lap you'd have to slightly adjust your braking points, but nothing major here. I get a little wide coming through turn 1, I haven't lost too much time because it's an odd corner turn 1. You can go quite deep into it won't punish you too hard. If you get on the power too early however, you're going to be hitting that left hand outer wall quite easily, and that's what really costs you time. And that's the thing I found with turns 1 and 2 in particular. I could maintain a good sense of speed for those turns compared to a good number of other drivers here, simply because it wasn't about how soon you got on the power, it's how you coasted the car through turns 1 and 2 that really mattered, and getting on the power too early was sometimes not beneficial. As we come through the high speed chicane once again here, you can see that I'm not dropping down to 4th gear. I'm taking on the advice of some of you in the comment section of previous videos. Sometimes it's better to run at a higher gear because you'll do some fuel saving there, rather than drop down to a lower gear and use a higher RPM in order to get more speed as you accelerate out the corner, but at the cost of more fuel. So now coming up into turn 8, braking at that 100 board, well just after it. I haven't started pulling it back just that far yet to save on the tyres, and coming through turn 9, lifting a little bit to avoid grazing the outer wall here, something that I had a habit of doing in practice mind you, and now coming down into turn number 10 once again. Things are going very well so far, but we can't get complacent. Lap times are consistent, we've got 2 203s on the board. I expect this is probably going to be a 204 or a very high 203 as we go quite deep into turn number 10 there. But it doesn't matter too much if you go too deep into turn 10 because that means you can get on the power a lot earlier and straight line out of the corner. Whereas if you go quite shallow into the corner and conserve a lot of speed, what ends up happening is you have to gradually steer yourself onto the straight coming out of turn 10, which costs you a little bit of time in return. So, coming up to end lap number 4 and start our final lap of the first stint. No alarm bells at the moment. I'm looking at a gap between myself and second, noting it's 3 seconds at this point, but everything's in our favour at the moment. We are controlling the pace, we are controlling that gap, and I have no issue if that suddenly drops down to 1.5 seconds, because I expect it will, as people behind will be quite feverish in order to get into first place or get close enough to fight for first place, whereas I can choose how that fight plays out. And this straight and the corners 1 and 2 are going to be where I control that fight, or that's my mental game already. And in terms of the fuel saving, it's been very easy to do. Perhaps could have saved a lot more fuel by going down into fuel setting 3 for particularly lap number 3. But we can see the lap times on the right hand side. Actually my 4th lap was almost my best lap, 203.144 compared to the second lap of 203.138. So we're maintaining a very consistent pace here. And looking at the fastest laps, that's that M6 behind. You can see how hard they're pushing by comparison. We're 202.3, practically a second faster, and we could say they're gaining at least half a second per lap if they're getting a clean lap off. But that's cost them a lot of fuel, that's cost them tyre wear, it means there's more mental pressure on them to potentially make a mistake. And that's one of the things which I think goes hidden in motorsport in general. It's not just about who has the best car or who's able to get the lead, but it's about that mental concentration, that mental fortitude, that once you've got the lead or you've got your position, you're willing to fight for it, but not necessarily immediately. You can see the long game, not just the short term. Coming through turn number 9 then, going a little bit wider initially in, but that means we're able to get on the throttle earlier coming out. Again, not too much time lost there, about the same, neutralising the loss and gain. And now coming down into turn 10 for the final time of this first stint, we can see the gap between myself and second place has now dropped to 2.3 seconds and broke a little bit earlier there, didn't want to overstretch into the corner, and we can see that gap's now dropped all the way down to 1.8 seconds and it's still closing. And we'll be coming into the pits very shortly with that gap still gradually contracting. Again, I'm not too alarmed. I'm expecting this gap is going to come down, and I'd rather it comes down now and then I can really make that M6 fight for it rather than right at the end when everything's on the line. So jumping into the pits, you'll see switching on to another set of racing mediums, and I'm going to refuel the car to practically the diamond here. And I come in with 5% fuel, whereas the M6 comes in with 4% fuel. So we've done a good job on fuel saving, plus 3% in terms of my target, and I'll be coming out ahead of the M6 hopefully, unless they really underfuel the car. Keeping an eye on that fuel gauge, we'll be coming out dead on the rhombus, or the diamond, and there we go. Back out into first place it'll be, and taking a look at the gap between myself and the M6 is coming out behind. A tiny little gain, we've gone up to 1.7 seconds here, And that means they had to take on a little bit of extra fuel, so that way they've got enough fuel not only to get them to the end of the race, but also to chase after and fight me. And that's what I was really prided myself on here. That I want to really make that M6 get into that tight corner. If you're going to fight for me, you're going to be critical on fuel by the end of this race. So now going on to this second stint, keep an eye on the rearview mirror as the M6 will get closer and closer over time potentially, but also making sure I get my braking point spot on, going down into third gear into turn 1 once again. Get a little bit early on the turn there, and that causes me to wobble a little bit, not too much time lost. Now coming through turn number 2, just lifting out of it, gradually coasting the car around. We can see the M6's headlights in our rear view mirror, nothing to be too concerned about, and now we're going to turn number 3. And we're just carrying the car through at this point, keeping it towards the left hand side of the track, because then we swing back towards turn number 4, the high speed chicane. Braking just off the 100 board just before the 50 and lifting the car off and gradually going through the corners here, and this is where the M6 was gaining some time every so often, but it looks as though we've relatively neutralised the time here as they're just coming up to speed with the state of their car and the fresh set of tyres. And now going through into turn number 7, staying in 5th gear here, no need to drop down to 4th or potentially consider that. And going through into turns 8 and 9 here, dropping down into 4th to get a little bit more power going through the corners. We could be a bit more aggressive on the throttle and let the car roll out more, but again, we're saving a bit of fuel here because we're down into fuel mapping setting 2. Again, by doing this fuel saving here, this works to my advantage when I have to fight for the position, because it means I've got more fuel to burn. It means I can run the car in power mode 1, that fuel mapping mode 1 I should say, a lot more happily compared to the guy behind. So coming out of the final corner, we can really see that M6 is gaining on the final corner. They're really going late on the brakes and getting on the power early coming out of the corner, and that gap's now down to 1.3 seconds, and they are slowly closing it by the looks of things. It's very hard to tell. It goes up a little bit and then goes down a little bit in that top left hand corner of your screen. It's getting tenser and tenser, it's getting tighter and tighter, but we just got to play to our strength, which is that we can control the pace here and all the cards will be in our favour so long as we don't make any significant mistakes. As to the rest of the grid, we're looking at the map in the top right corner of our screen. It really looks as though it's a fight for first over 2 cars now. It's a 2-horse race of first, then it looks as though we've got a 2-horse race of third, and then it looks as though we've got a couple of guys who are gradually pushing their way out the field. 5th place is all by himself, but the pack has scattered quite a bit now, so it's little local fights rather than a big fight for first or say third place, which can happen on tracks. We saw that at Brands Hatch to an extent last time out, where first and second were constantly fighting one another for the lead, and then the pack spread out to the point where they're all little local fights, and you're seeing that again here. Coming out of turn 2 then, and into turn 3 once more. The thing I did enjoy about running this car in 5th gear all the way through the circuit up to turn 8 was the fact that it meant you could just focus on getting the correct line through the track, and it meant you could really enjoy the feel of the track, the bumps in the road, going into the corners here, coming through this high speed chicane, 4 and 5 once again, get nice and tight on the line, get early on the power and not feel as though the car's going to fall away from you, lifting very slightly to go through 6 here. I found if you were too heavy on the power going into 6, you'd really clump the wall on the left hand side and that would ruin your approach going up into 7. We could just lift off, carry through. And looking up at the time in here, we can see that M6 is now 1.2 seconds behind as we go down to 4th gear to go through turns 8 and then carry through into 9. And that M6 is now almost within slipstream range. In fact, they got into slipstream range, and I get the feeling that that pass may potentially be coming up into the straight going into lap number 8. So what have I got to prepare for at this point? Well, I've got to accept the fact that the BMW will overtake me. But in return, what I have to think of at this point as they get very close, because they brake a lot deeper going into turn 10 than myself, is that once they've overtaken me, I need to be instantly in their slipstream and I need to get the advantage back on them going into turn 1 and overtake them before we get into turn 1, so that way I have the racing line going into that corner. So I'm keeping an eye on the rear view mirror at this point. I'm in fuel map setting 2 because I want the BMW to get past as soon as possible, and I want to save fuel as he's passing me, as he or she's passing me I should say. Then now on my left hand side, so I'm just letting their car go past it. I don't need to change the radar setting, just play it smart and gradually drift in behind them, but they know what I'm planning to do, so they drift over to the right. So what I decide to do is hold position for the time being and then drift in behind them once again and make sure I stay tight to their backside, and you can see as they're gradually squeezing me over to the inner wall going into turn 1, they're giving me just enough space. I've got the position and now I've got the speed to get past them. We're charging down to this corner. I get in front of them just as we're about heading to the braking zone, and they unfortunately brake a little bit later than myself. Perhaps they forgot their braking point, they slam me in the back, and that causes me to go charging off into the wall and I pick up a 1.5 second penalty. Now I reviewed this back after the race, and I would consider, based on FIA rules, what I did there in terms of the overtaking and positioning my car going into turn number 1 as legal, because I track position to go in. I appreciate there's a very tight margin and the BMW driver has actually left the race. Now I can't explain why they did it, I haven't received any correspondence from them. If they are watching this video, feel free to leave a comment explaining why. But what I think it is, by picking up a 1.5 second penalty, which I picked up because of the fact I went charging off into the wall, that's the way the penalties are set on this track by the looks of things, it meant that the race for first place was effectively over, unless what the BMW could have done is at the penalty zone, if they felt as though it was all their fault and that's why they've quit the race, they could have slowed down at the same time as me slowing down going into the penalty zone, and then we could have fought on the final lap for first place. But what happened. I feel as though I was 95% if not 100% in the right there. Very tight margin to call, to be fair. In the comment section, if you think I did wrong, feel free to say so and why, and I'll happily learn from it. Because at the end of the day, I'm here to race as cleanly as I possibly can, and I'm going to make tons of mistakes going forward, and I want to learn from them. I want to become a better driver, not just in terms of race pace, but also in terms of being a gentleman on track. So where does this leave the race now after that rather tense situation with second place? Well, as I take my penalty here, I do lose a considerable amount of time to the guys in second and third place, but it's nothing to be alarmed about because by the looks of things, actually I haven't lost any time. They seem to be fighting one another quite hard. Perhaps they picked up some penalties of their own as well. And really here, in fact they're now really starting to gain. I say that, sorry, it just took a very long time for the timing screen to catch up because they're quite a way behind. I've lost about 2 seconds to them effectively because of the penalty zone. Now it's just a case of bringing the car home, and you can see in terms of fuel remaining, I've got exactly 1 lap remaining. I can choose to run the car at maximum power at this point in terms of the fuel mapping if I want to, pardon me, but there's no need for me to do so, so I'm just going to simply keep to my standard approach of as we go through turns 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10, I'm going to go down to fuel map 2 and just take it easy. I can afford to let the guys behind eat into the gap between myself and them because I've got ample room to do so. So not going to do anything silly at this point, just drive my natural racing line through the track and wrap things up by the looks of things. It's been a good race, and in all honesty, shocked how things played out in that fight on lap 8 for first place. It's unfortunate it ended up the way it did. Looks as though, however, the M6 driver was much more adventurous on the brakes compared to myself, and that's why they were the faster driver, and credit to them, they did drive a phenomenal race, and I hope that if they decided to join the 11 o'clock race, which was after this, I was at the 9 o'clock race in the evening, that they won that race because they really deserved a win. And now as we come through turn number 7 here, to complete it off, we've just got to get right on the braking point here, going into turn 8 and 9. Braking just before the 50 board, going down to 4th gear here, not getting on the power as early because I don't feel the pressure to do so, just make sure we can bring it home, take it nice and easy, don't have to do anything stupid at this point. And coming down into turn number 10 for the final time, something I will need to work on in terms of the braking point here, because I get the feeling I could brake a lot later, braking just before the 100 board and after the gully that I use as a marker, bringing her around, and now on the power to finish off and bring home first place in the BMW M3 GT. The second win of my GT Sport career, and one I was very happy with, all things considered. It was also confirmed after the race that my driver rating had indeed moved up to C, so slowly but surely making my way up through the ranks. Next time out will be race 6 at the Nürburgring 24-hour circuit, which happened on Saturday, so yesterday as this video going live, so I'll be covering that race within the coming days. Still, thank you for watching. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to leave a like, comment or subscribe for future episodes. As always, I've been TX141, and until next time, take care.